National Day of Prayer, from last year's celebration to this year's statement, how the White House is marking the occasion. Pet projects. U.S. lawmakers shift their strategy on earmarks, how the old practice has become new again. Papal message, what the Holy Father is saying about India's surge in coronavirus cases. And Swiss guards. The Vatican welcomes a new group of sworn defenders. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 6, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden continues the tradition of declaring the first Thursday in May the National Day of Prayer. He says prayer has nourished countless souls and powered moral movements. But his statement comes in contrast to last year's White House event where faith leaders were invited to mark the occasion. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening. President Biden is still recognizing the National Day of Prayer, just not in the same way as it was last year. Instead, today, the president left for Louisiana to push his American Jobs Plan.
President Joe Biden on his way to Louisiana this morning, first issuing a statement on this National Day of Prayer, writing in part, as we continue to confront the crises and challenges of our time, from a deadly pandemic to the loss of lives and livelihoods in its wake, to a reckoning on racial justice, to the existential threat of climate change, Americans of faith can call upon the power of prayer to provide hope and uplift us for the work ahead. The president also writes, let us find in our prayers, however they are delivered, the determination to overcome adversity, rise above our differences, and come together as one nation to meet this moment in history. God bless America. Past presidents, including President Donald Trump, have honored the day as well, with faith leaders from all backgrounds worshiping and praying to God.
Dear Heavenly Father, I ask you to grant us in this moment to be in your most holy presence.
Meanwhile, in Lake Charles, Louisiana today,
we're standing here in the shadow of the I-10 bridge.
The president stopped by an old bridge that sees thousands of daily crossings, but 20 years past its designed lifespan.
Traffic bottlenecks and delays.
The president pushed his American Jobs Plan to get that bridge and other infrastructure needs taken care of.
6 lanes of interstate narrow into 4 lanes of a bridge. That's a recipe for disaster.
Now, critics like Representative Steve Scalise call the president's $2.3 trillion plan, quote, a budget-busting, tax-hike-spending boondoggle masquerading as an infrastructure bill. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, for the first time in a decade, earmarks are making a comeback on Capitol Hill. Earmarks allow lawmakers to set aside taxpayer funds in a bill for specific projects in their districts. Currently, lawmakers are using it in President Biden's $4 trillion plans for infrastructure and social programs, but not everyone is happy about it. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
20 Republican senators signed a letter saying that they're opposing earmarks. They say participating in earmarks is, quote, an inherently wasteful spending practice that is prone to serious abuse. But that's not stopping House Republicans and Democrats from participating in the process. Would you spend over $1.7 million to spruce up a Japanese garden in Portland, Oregon? How about $436,000 for a meditation and restorative yoga program in New Jersey? These are just some of the controversial community funding project requests filed by House lawmakers as earmarks make a return in Congress. Senator Rand Paul tells me he's against them.
I think it's a terrible abuse of power, and we went a long way towards better spending by getting rid of it. I'm disappointed that Democrats are bringing the earmarks back.
Congressman Greg Murphy emailed me this statement, quote, I believe the restoration of earmarks at a time when the Biden administration is pushing to spend $6 trillion is a decision that will have grave consequences for our nation. While earmarks can have great intentions, history has proven them to be gateway drugs to runaway spending as well as abuse and corruption. Despite House Republicans arguing that earmarks are a pathway to congressional corruption, last Friday was a deadline for House lawmakers to submit their earmark requests. 326 members of the House, including 220 Democrats and 106 Republicans, have made requests for specific projects. Statistics show they total from both parties more than $6 billion in spending. There are millions of dollars collectively earmarked for public arts programs, climate change initiatives, and even more money for Planned Parenthood. Senator Paul says a lawmaker's seniority also plays a role in the funding.
I think spending shouldn't be based on the seniority of the congressman or senator. It ought to be based on, we have limited amount of funds. We should spend it where it's most needed. Before earmarks were banned about 10 years ago, the transportation bill would have 6,000 earmarks on it.
Supporters of earmarks say that these specific projects can improve living conditions in local communities, but critics continue to say that they add to the cost of bills and also are linked to possible corruption. That's why Congress stopped it in 2011 until this year. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
The Texas legislature is moving a bill to ban abortions upon detection of a baby's heartbeat. Its new element would allow private lawsuits against a doctor performing or any other party abetting an abortion. Texas Right to Life says it would not punish post-abortive women. Our report in the Wall Street Journal today says Catholic priests in Germany are set to bless same-sex couples in defiance of Pope Francis. The blessings are scheduled to begin on Monday and take place in about 100 Catholic churches. More than a dozen will be live-streamed. This at the same time German Catholic leaders are in the middle of what they call the synodal path. Joining us now is AC Wimmer, editor-in-chief of CNA Germany. AC, welcome back. Great to see you. What more do we know about these blessings, and why are they taking place on Monday?
There's a lot of news coming out about that at the moment. Research indicates, Tracy, that there's a particularly good reason to do them on a Monday, namely that traditionally that's the day that priests take a day off, and therefore it'll be harder for the German bishops to say they shouldn't be doing things like blessing same-sex couples on the day off, because after all, they can do with their free time whatever they want. And that is the rather pernicious, one might add, argument that's being played out.
And what about the reaction in Germany? How are people there reacting, especially the faithful?
There's a lot of concern about there being an open schism now with the rebellion that's going on. We've heard from priests, we've heard from normal faithful who've even contacted us as a news agency saying, can please someone do something about this? We would like to raise awareness in the Vatican about this. We hope that the church doesn't split from the global universal Catholic Church. We don't want to be Luther 2.0. There's a lot of concern, but in the mainstream, there's also a lot of support, obviously, for blessing same-sex couples, because the wording around it has been supported and, one might add, pushed perhaps by secular media too.
And what can you tell us about the synodal path and what it is also and what it hopes to accomplish?
The synodal process is something of a form sui generis, they say, something that's organized almost like a synod, but not quite a synod or a particular council. It is meant to drive reforms that have been tabled again and again over the last few decades, but more recently become pressing in the wake of sexual abuse scandals. However, they do not deal with what Pope Francis has challenged the German Catholics in a seminal letter that he wrote in 2019, namely to embrace evangelization and return to the sacraments and make good use of them, as he told the German bishops in 2015. Rather, the synodal process deals with questions of power, celibacy, sexual morality in general, and the life of the priesthood, amongst other things.
AC, is there any sense that the Vatican will become involved?
There is a lot of expectation about some kind of response. The Vatican has intervened a few times. Pope Francis has written that letter. In 2015, has spoken to the German bishops well ahead of the synodal way. In other words, about a risk of resignation and a dearth of the faith in Germany. And the Vatican itself, a number of congregations, of course, have issued interventions as well. Whether and how the escalation now might take place is anyone's guess, really. Some people are expecting the Pope to call on the German bishops to come to Rome and have a conversation, but that's just one of several legitimate speculations.
And AC, before I let you go, overall, can you give us a sense of how the church is doing in Germany right now? It seems like these certainly are troubling times there.
They are troubling times for the faithful and for the church, and on a number of fronts. In fact, that is one of the reasons the organizers are pushing on the synodal way, of course. A lot of people are leaving the church in droves. A lot of people are concerned with where the church is going in one way or another. And there is a real concern also that the traditional role that the Catholic Church has played in Germany is under threat in a way that has never been seen before, and that might impact the global, the universal church as well.
AC, thank you so much for talking with us today. We really appreciate it. AC Wimmer, Editor-in-Chief of CNA Germany. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Pope Francis is reaching out to the coronavirus-stricken people of India. The Holy Father expresses care to the sick and their families, to those who care for them, and in particular to those who are mourning the loss of their loved ones. Pope Francis said aggressive forms of nationalism and radical individualism during the pandemic have grown, having an impact on migrants. The Holy Father calls for a greater focus on working together towards justice and peace. The World Day of Migrants and Refugees will be celebrated in September. In Bogota, Colombia, overnight anti-government protests turned violent. Civilians and police officers were injured. Protests began over a now withdrawn tax proposal. Marches are spreading nationally against poor living conditions. Colombia's president blames clashes on the country's drug lords. Dozens have died in 8 days. While China continues to criminalize political dissent in Hong Kong, the government has imposed new prison sentences against 4 pro-democracy activists. The most prominent is Joshua Wong. They pleaded guilty to last year's unauthorized vigil for the Tiananmen Square massacre, which thousands attended. Police made no arrests at the time, but have since charged more than 20. Indonesia has deployed some 150,000 police and military to enforce a coronavirus travel ban that's not stopping 18 million people who plan to travel for the Muslim feast of Eid. The holiday marks the end of the fasting month of Ramadan. While the U.S. Secretary of State is in Ukraine, pledging to support the country in case fighting begins with Russia.
And I can tell you, Mr. President, that we stand strongly with you. Partners do as well. I heard the same thing when I was at NATO a couple of weeks ago.
Secretary Antony Blinken says the United States is monitoring the situation between Kiev and Moscow. The Kremlin says its soldiers are not on the ground in eastern Ukraine, and military drills held earlier this month have ended, with the troops being sent back in their bases. While Scotland is voting today on whether to leave the post-Brexit United Kingdom, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon leads the pro-independence Scottish National Party. Scotland had previously voted to remain in the UK in a 2014 independence referendum. Coming up, declining birth rate, what the trend says about the state of families in the U.S., and improving human health, how the Vatican is getting involved. A report released from the CDC earlier this week has some troubling news about the birth rate in the United States. As one analyst noted, the U.S. birth rate has hit its lowest level. The U.S. also is below the replacement fertility level. 25 states had more deaths than births in 2020. Joining us now is Brad Wilcox, fellow at the Institute for Family Studies and director of the National Marriage Project. Brad, thanks so much for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it. Let's talk a little bit more about this report. This is the 6th consecutive year that the U.S. birth rate has declined. What do you think is the driving force, and is it cause for concern?
Obviously, one of the factors in 2020 is COVID, which spiked births down in December. But this is obviously a part of a longer running pattern, as your comments just indicated. And we're seeing just kind of fertility falling in the U.S. and in many countries. And it's definitely cause for concern for the future of our economy. I think more importantly, for the future of our families here in America.
And where do we see the largest decline in birth rates? Which age group?
We see the largest declines among teens and 20-somethings. And typically, kind of historically, we'd be having a lot of our kids among 20-something Americans. But that's just not happening today the way, that it was, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
And Brad, which age group can we know is having the highest birth rate? And is that something maybe to celebrate?
Well, I mean, it's still the case that, that women in their 20s and early 30s are having more kids. It's just they're having many fewer kids than was the case, 30 or 40 years ago. A lot of young women are postponing getting married. They're postponing having kids. And so, when this is sort of happening in large numbers, it's driving our fertility rate in the U.S. down. And what that means, of course, is that we're going to have smaller families, and we're going to have fewer families with kids, and more adults who end up, never having children. And I think as they hit midlife and later life, there's going to be a lot of what we call kind of, bare branches, where people just don't have the social ties and the emotional support that they need to get by in life or to thrive in life.
Yeah, and also in addition to the decline in birth rates overall last year, 25 states actually had more deaths than births. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the impact that will have?
As we kind of look at press reports on this, as you know, we're seeing that, many states across the U.S. are seeing more people die than babies born. That's just kind of a sign of demographic decline. We've been kind of seeing this in many places, in East Asia and Japan, for instance, in Southern Europe and Italy, for instance. And I think it gives people oftentimes, a sense of despair not to see their schools filled with children, not to see their streets teeming with families. So, that can engender, just a lack of hope and a concern for the future, that's obviously merited.
Yeah, and I also noted that in a tweet you wrote that the United States is now below Japan's fertility rate in 1988. Why is that so noteworthy?
Yeah, so, Japan, I think, is really one of the countries here that gives us tremendous cause for concern. What we're seeing in Japan is the country is literally shrinking by hundreds of thousands of people now every year. And, because they're having many more people die in Japan than babies born. And starting really in the 1980s and beyond there, we see just a dramatic decline in fertility. Where for a variety of reasons, young Japanese adults were not getting married and not having kids. And so the concern here is that the United States might follow down the path that's already been pioneered in countries like Japan. And that path is a path of economic stagnation. It's a path of, way too few families. And it's a path, too, of tremendous loneliness. There was just really a harrowing story that was told recently about, millions of older Japanese people just living alone, dying alone, not even being discovered oftentimes when they had died for often weeks on end. And it's just because there are not enough kids, there are not enough family members now for so many people in Japan. So that's, of course, the big cause for concern here, is that we might be in the U.S. heading down a path where dramatic declines in marriage and fertility end up meaning that too many Americans don't end up having families.
And Brad, before I let you go, really quickly, we don't have a lot of time left, but what do you think can be done to reverse this so-called baby bust trend?
Well, I think one good idea is passing a child allowance like Senator Romney has proposed. Another good idea would be to address sort of the weaknesses in our educational system that make so many of our young adults not prepared for today's labor market, like improving vocational education. But most fundamentally, I think we have to sort of change the culture. Too many Americans today, according to Pew data, falsely believe that their jobs are more likely to make them fulfilled and make them happy. But we know from the data that strong marriages, strong families are actually much more likely to deliver for Americans when it comes to giving them a sense of meaning, purpose, direction, and also happiness.
Absolutely, Brad. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Brad Wilcox, Fellow at the Institute for Family Studies. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me on today.
Up next, history of service. See the new group of Swiss guards sworn to defend the Pope. And faith in art, a famous painter's depiction of Saints Peter and Paul. Well, the Vatican is hosting an international conference on the relationship between faith and science. The three-day online event will include speeches by Pope Francis and Dr. Anthony Fauci. This is the fifth conference the Pontifical Council for Culture has organized with the Cura Foundation, an organization dedicated to improving human health. Joining us now is Monsignor Tomasz Trafny, head of the Science and Faith Department at the Pontifical Council for Culture. Monsignor, welcome. Thank you so much for your time today. Tell us, what is the goal of this conference?
Well, the primary goal is to discuss important topics related to the situation we experience and the challenges we are facing. And as always, the key word is a dialogue. This is the fundamental mission of our Pontifical Council, to create a spot for discussion and to address important issues. Some of them are of medical manner, some of them are anthropological and cultural, and we are trying to get people from different backgrounds to discuss.
And what is the Vatican's position in the discussions?
Well, first of all, we are hosts or co-hosts with Cura Foundation, and we are trying to get people together to work together, to start to understand each other, and to see that in many important topics and questions, the Church wants to be on the first line, the front line of discussion. We don't want to be on the margin of society. And medicine, biotechnologies, life sciences are the field of major interest today and major developments. So we want to be a part of that discussion.
And does Catholic Church teaching come up in the discussions? And also, how do people respond?
Well, I think it's obvious. So we have two cardinals speaking, the Vice Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences giving a speech. We will have Pope Francis giving his audience. So I think there is no doubt about the Catholic teaching involved in this. How people react, it depends. We need to understand that we are bringing people from different cultural backgrounds, also different religious backgrounds. And some of them even are not believers at all, but they are researchers and experts in their own fields. And for that reason, they are part of the discussion. So we are facing a lot of challenges. The very first one is to listen to each other. The second, to understand each other. A lot of misunderstandings come, for example, from the fact that many often we use the same linguistic categories, the same words, but assigning to them different meanings. And for that reason, it's important to talk to each other and to start to listen to each other with mutual respect.
Monsignor, thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate your time. Monsignor Tomasz Trafny, head of the Science and Faith Department of the Pontifical Council for Culture. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Pope Francis told New Swiss Guards they are a testimony and sign of the Church's welcome to others. Today, 34 New Swiss Guards took an oath to serve the Holy Father and the Catholic Church. Every year, new recruits swear in to the world's smallest army on May 6th, the day when over 100 Swiss Guards lost their lives to defend the Pope 515 years ago. Finally tonight, in Britain's Victoria and Albert Museum, a new exhibit called The Raphael Cartoon shows, among other things, Raphael's tapestry designs for the Sistine Chapel depicting Saints Peter and Paul.
They might be some of the most significant Renaissance artworks in Britain at this time, and they really represent the revolution in tapestry design that Raphael sparked over 500 years ago.
Intended to mark the 500th anniversary of Raphael's death, the beautiful exhibit has waited a year due to the coronavirus. The V&A Museum reopens on May 19th. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.